Long ago, before the treaties and the trade routes, before peace was something anyone believed could last, there was a war, not a skirmish, not a rebellion, a full war, cold, brutal, and endless, fought not for glory, but for survival. Worlds burned, fleets vanished, colonies that had taken decades to build disappeared in hours, and across that endless battlefield of stars, one name echoed louder than any general or government: Aegis Eternum. It was said to be a warship, but not just any warship, a machine wrapped in legend, powered by systems no one understood, designed not by committee but by necessity, forged in the final, desperate days of Earth's great fleet. It was never meant to be part of an armada. It was meant to be the last one standing. No one agreed on what it looked like. Some said it was as large as a city, with hull plating that could withstand the collapse of a moon. Others claimed it moved like a shadow too fast for scanners to lock onto, but everyone agreed on one thing. When the Aegis arrived, things changed. Entire battles turned. Fleets that outnumbered it 10-1 fled without firing. The name alone was enough to silence transmissions, because the Aegis didn't speak, it only acted. And when it opened fire, there was no warning, no build-up, no dramatic music. Just sudden, perfect violence, cold and clean, like the swing of a blade in a quiet room. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the Aegis was gone. No announcement, no wreckage, no farewell. It simply vanished. Some said it had been destroyed, its last act a sacrifice to save a world the galaxy had already given up on. Others said it had gone rogue, retreating into uncharted space to avoid falling into the wrong hands. The most hopeful said it had gone into hiding, waiting for a time when it would be needed again. But over the years, even those stories faded. The name stopped appearing in history texts. Records were sealed, mentions erased. New generations called it a ghost ship, a tale for tired pilots and wide-eyed cadets, a thing that never existed in the first place. In time, even the word Aegis came to mean something else: old, obsolete, the last relic of a war no one wanted to remember. And so the galaxy moved on. Trade flourished. Councils formed. Fleets grew leaner, sleeker, built more for display than for war. Peace, they said, was permanent now. But peace is just the space between disasters, and deep on the edge of council space, in a colony no one had spoken about in decades, another name began to rise. A name not found in databases or policy meetings, but spoken in quiet desperation. The colony was called Araxis Fat, a mining world. Poor, harsh, forgotten. When their call for help went out, they didn't ask for fleets, they knew better. They didn't trust the council, and the council didn't see them as worth the fuel cost. Instead, someone in the comms tower, an old technician with a worn patch from Earth's early days, entered a code long decommissioned, a name, and transmitted it into the void, requesting assistance. Aegis Eternum. A silent message, hurled into the dark like a prayer to a god no one believed in anymore. No one in the colony expected a response. They thought it was a long shot, a whisper, a joke told at the edge of extinction. But the signal didn't vanish. It traveled, past dead systems and abandoned jump gates, past derelicts and black holes and voids where ships stopped returning long ago. It reached a place not marked on any map, and something answered. Araxis 4 was not meant to be a colony. It started as a supply station, temporary, unofficial, just a place for survey ships to refuel while mapping the empty edges of council territory. But like so many places in the galaxy, it grew not because someone planned it, but because someone forgot about it. Miners came first, chasing rumors of rare metals below the planet's cracked surface. Then engineers, then families. Soon, domes sprang up, markets, habitation towers. No one called it home with pride, but they called it home. For 20 years, Araxis 4 survived. Not thrived, survived. Its people were used to doing without support, without recognition, without even regular supplies. Council ships passed by twice a year, once to scan, once to remind the colonists they were, technically, within protected territory. But when the colony filed for additional security, they were denied. Too small. Too far. When pirates skimmed their satellite networks, they were told to be cautious. And when the first ships appeared in orbit, those ships, no one came. They weren't pirates. They weren't smugglers. They were something else. Unmarked. Silent. Cold. They didn't demand surrender. They didn't broadcast threats. They simply arrived, shut down the colony's long-range comms, and began a slow, methodical descent. At first, the people hoped it was a mistake, a drill, a misunderstanding, but within hours, power grids started failing. Drones went offline. The outer domes collapsed without a sound. The colonists tried to fight. What few defense turrets they had were old, barely operational. The ground force was civilian-grade. Tools, not weapons. They never stood a chance. Still, they resisted, falling back, sheltering in the mining shafts and sublevels. They used what they had. Hacked old transports, wired explosives, anything to slow the enemy's advance. But they knew time was running out. The governor sent out 3 distress calls to Council Command. No reply. A 4th call reached a nearby trading post. It was marked unverified and filed into the backlog. No one was coming, until someone remembered the story. A technician named Elian, mid-50s, half his lungs replaced from years in the mines, sat hunched over the backup. Transmitter flipping through old codebooks, most of it was junk. Ancient encryption, decommissioned protocols. But buried deep in the old Earth files was a single directive. One word. Aegis. He typed the call code. No one objected, not because they believed it would work, but because there was nothing else left to do. They sent the message. They included coordinates, life signs, tactical data, enemy scans. At the end, Elian spoke directly into the mic. If anyone's still out there, we didn't ask for a war, we just wanted to live. They came anyway. And if this reaches something, anything, then maybe the stories were true. Aegis Eternum, if you're real. We could use a myth right now. That was the last broadcast. Within hours, the main power grid failed. Food systems crashed. Shelter seals began leaking. The final fallback generators in the mining tunnels kept the colony breathing. Barely. And there, in the flickering dark, people waited. Some prayed, some wept. Most just sat in silence, holding on to the thin thread of survival that humans have always carried, even in the worst conditions. They didn't expect salvation. They expected the end. But somewhere, far beyond, the stars they could no longer see, something stirred. Something that had once carried 1,000 battles on its hull. Something whose name had been buried, whose memory had been erased, but whose code had never been broken. And when it heard that old name called again, it answered. The signal from Araxis 4 wasn't strong. It was frayed, cracked by interference, buried under old encryption layers that hadn't been used in nearly a century. Modern council relays ignored it entirely. Their systems weren't built to recognize that kind of code anymore. But some machines still remembered. Some systems, long forgotten and left drifting in the dark, still listened. One of them, Relay 09 Sigma, was drifting near the edge of an unmapped system. It hadn't transmitted in 71 years. It was considered dead, powerless. It wasn't. Buried inside its hull was a subroutine, an old Earth protocol triggered only by specific call signs. A failsafe from a war long past, when Earth had prepared for the day when it too would fall silent. When the signal from Araxis 4 hit it, the relay didn't hesitate. It activated, ran the code, and forwarded the message through a series of ancient direct path beacons, tight beam systems hardwired through dust clouds, asteroid tunnels, old jump gate skeletons. Every connection was buried under layers of time, but every connection still worked. It didn't take hours. It didn't take days. It took minutes. The message traveled not through hyperspace lanes or satellite constellations, but through something older, something human. A ghost web of emergency channels laid down in the final years of Earth's expansion. And at the end of that web, something waited. A dark space, uncharted, empty to every map. No suns, no planets, just black. But in that blackness floated something, massive, motionless, cold dead to every scan, until the signal arrived. A single pulse. One word. Aegis. The thing in the dark, unmoving for decades, flared to life. Not in violence, not with noise. Just a hum. The kind of sound you feel more than hear. Like an old engine remembering what it was. Lights blinked inside the massive hull. Systems checked themselves. Artificial intelligence. Coded not in sleek modern lines, but in brutal, functional blocks, woke from digital sleep. Its first thought was a name, Eternum. Its second was a location, Araxis Fur. Its third was the directive, hardwired into its core, deep beneath any command override. If no one else responds, you will. The Aegis didn't ask who had called. It didn't request tactical data. It didn't calculate odds. It simply began powering up. Fuel lines flowed. Energy surged into long dormant systems. Cannons rotated, stretching after decades of stillness. Engines, old enough to be considered extinct by modern engineering, lit like twin stars. Inside, no crew walked its halls. There hadn't been crew in years. The Aegis didn't need them anymore. It had become something more. Not just a ship, a judgment. Final voice for those no one else would speak for. It scanned the coordinates again, confirmed life signs, confirmed enemy presence, then engaged its jump systems. Not sleek, not quiet. Its warp field bent space like steel under stress, ripping a path through the void. No authorization, no transponder, no clearance. Because it didn't need permission. The Aegis wasn't part of the council, wasn't part of anyone's fleet. It answered to something older, something simpler. A promise, and now that promise had been broken. The colony of Araxis had called, no one else had come, so the Aegis was coming, and for the first time in nearly a century, it moved. The Aegis Eternum did not glide, it did not drift, it moved, with weight, with purpose, with the kind of momentum that made space itself seem hesitant to resist. When its engines roared to life, there was no grand flare of light, no display, just motion, silent and certain. The ship didn't broadcast a signal. It didn't activate a transponder. It didn't even bother to scan for traffic, because the Aegis was alone. It had always been alone. Designed to operate without escort, without command, without backup. Built to be the last ship in the sky when everything else had fallen, and now, for the first time in generations, it had somewhere to be. Its course was locked. Araxis 4. Its mission, buried in the cold AI mind that ran its systems, was simple. Respond. That was all. No treaties, no permission, just the echo of a promise made long ago, that if no one else would stand, it would. The path was not smooth. Modern hyperspace lanes had shifted. The folded corridors between systems had narrowed, collapsed, or been rerouted by council engineering teams. The Aegis ignored them. It carved its own way, cutting through space in the way old Terran ships once did, not gliding with finesse, but punching through it like a battering ram through steel. In some systems, outposts picked up faint flickering anomalies, jump shadows, magnetic residue, disturbances in gravity fields. The signs were small, hard to trace, but they sent a ripple of unease through the few engineers old enough to recognize them. One even muttered beneath his breath, "That can't be real." The signal vanished before he could finish the scan, and by then, the Aegis was already gone. No system saw it arrive, no station tracked it, but the ship was coming. Faster than any official record said was possible. Because the Aegis had one advantage the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. It didn't care what was possible. Its systems weren't designed for diplomacy. Its drive core wasn't built for efficiency. It was made for one purpose: to reach the helpless before it was too late. And so it did. Inside its hull, its ancient, systems-calculated impact windows, tactical overlays bloomed across cold, flickering screens. Not predictions, certainties. It scanned for enemy ships near Araxis 4 and marked each with cold, algorithmic precision. Targets acquired, strike paths plotted. A message queued, not to the enemy, to the colony. It would not arrive until just before the Aegis did. Just a simple line of text, delivered through backdoor channels the Council didn't even know still functioned. "Hold on, we heard you." Back on Araxis, that message appeared on one of the few still operating terminals in a mining shelter. The technician who'd sent the call, Elian, stared at the words. No header, no source ID. But he knew. Everyone knew. And outside, in the quiet darkness above the world, the stars seemed to pause as if they too remembered the name they had buried, the name they had feared. And now, the myth was moving again. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with purpose. Because, for the Aegis, the war had never really ended. It had just been waiting for the next call, the next silence, the next place the galaxy decided wasn't worth saving, and Araxis had called. So now, the ghost ship moved. The enemy didn't know what they were looking at. When the Aegis Eternum dropped out of folded space above Araxis 4, no warning came with it. No hyperspace surge, no flashing signature, no entry code, just shadow, a shape in orbit where there had been none before. It blocked out the sky, not just in size but in presence. The enemy fleet had been in formation, tight, efficient, wrapping around the upper hemisphere like a tightening noose. Their scans were focused downward, watching the colony's last shelters flicker and dim. They were preparing to finish it. Final bombardment. No survivors. Clean, quiet, until something arrived. It didn't announce itself. It didn't power up weapons. Visibly, it just existed. And in its existence, everything else seemed smaller. Their systems tried to scan it, failed, tried again. All they got was distortion, mass readings that made no sense, hull structure that didn't match any known design, no heat signature, no lights. But it was moving. Slow. Deliberate. Like it. Wasn't in a hurry, because it didn't need to be. One enemy captain ordered a test shot, just a warning. Just enough to show whoever or whatever it was that this wasn't a system to play games in. The shot fired. A clean arc of energy aimed toward the center of the strange ship's hull. It never reached. The beam collapsed halfway, their tongue swallowed by a ripple of distortion around the ship's surface, like light disappearing into fog. Then came the reply. Not a transmission, not a threat, just action. One beam. Thin, precise, barely visible. It lanced out from the Aegis, not from a turret, not from a cannon, but from a seam in its armor that split, open like a blade unsheathing itself, and in an instant the enemy cruiser that had fired the warning shot was gone. No explosion, no debris, just a flash, and then absence. It was as if the ship had been erased. That was when the panic started. Commands. Flew through the fleet. All ships reposition. Identify the contact. Fire at will. Missiles launched. Beams fired. Dozens of weapons targeted the lone vessel in orbit. The sky lit up, and none of it mattered. The Aegis didn't dodge. It didn't retreat. It simply moved. A subtle tilt of its frame, and the air around it changed. A warping of space that bent every shot off course, shattered targeting arrays, turned perfect firing solutions into chaos. And then, it began its work. In less than a minute, 5 ships were destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. The strikes came too fast to track. Each one surgical, each one final. No patterns, no rhythm, just cold, calculated devastation. The enemy tried to retreat. Some ships turned away, others attempted blind jumps. But the Aegis was ready. Its AI had already predicted the retreat paths, and as those ships tried to run, the space in front of them tore open, not to receive them, but to end them. Micro-singularities, short-lived, tightly controlled tears in reality. One jump ship hit the fold and vanished mid-jump, caught in transition. It never came out the other side. The rest stopped trying. They surrendered, or burned, and just like that, the siege of Araxis was over. The entire battle had lasted fewer than 7 minutes. On the surface, the colonists stood beneath a skylit, with flickering fire. They watched the debris of the enemy fleet scatter. They watched the black silhouette of the Aegis hover, silent, unmoving. And for the first time since the attacks began, they believed, not in stories, not in heroes, but in something real, because the myth had returned, not to conquer, not to command, but to keep a promise. The Aegis Eternum didn't stay long. After the last enemy ship fell, it remained in orbit for less than 2 hours. No landing, no message to the Council, no declaration of victory, just presence. Then, as quietly as it had arrived, it turned and vanished, folding, space around itself like a ripple drawn inward, and was gone. And yet the questions remained. Not just on Araxis or everywhere. Who built this thing? The Council had no record of it, not in modern archives, not in ship registries, not even in the classified vaults, the kind only accessed by high command. There were whispers, of course, among the older officers, the ones who'd served before Earth, withdrew. They remembered hearing the name once, Aegis Eternum. But back then, it wasn't a ship. It was a project, a theoretical design developed at the tail end of the War of Collapse. The war had nearly ended everything, Earth's colonies, its alliances, even the planet itself. In desperation, a group of Terran engineers and military minds began work on a ship unlike any other. It would have no crew. It would have no support. It would rely on no nation, no flag. Its only allegiance would be to a directive, hard-coded, unalterable. Respond to unprotected distress. Not to military engagements, not to border disputes, only to helpless calls. The kind no one else answered. They called it Project Aegis, but most believed it was never completed. The resources required were beyond anything available at the time. The prototype disappeared from reports. Some said it was scrapped, others said it was buried. Too dangerous to be trusted in wartime. But what the Council didn't know, or didn't want to remember, was that Earth had finished the project, in secret, far from public view, and had launched it, alone. They had no plans for follow-up, ships, no command structure, just one vessel, one mind, and one rule. If the strong will not protect the weak, then we will. It wasn't about justice, it wasn't about revenge, it was about memory. Because Earth had been left behind once too. They had cried for help, and no one came. So they built something that would never let that happen again. Something that couldn't be bribed or persuaded. Something that didn't weigh politics against lives. The Aegis was designed to listen, and when the silence came, to break it. The Terran Union never announced the launch, because they knew what the galaxy would do if it found out. They'd try to control it, or worse, destroy it, because a ship that answers only to the voiceless threatens those who ignore them. So, Earth erased it from the records, let the myth grow, let it fade into stories. And quietly, somewhere deep in uncharted space, the Aegis waited. Until now. Now, it had returned. And suddenly, the entire balance of power felt different. The Council tried to downplay it. An unregistered AI weapon. A rogue anomaly. No confirmed connection to Terran systems, but none of that mattered, because the people saw what happened on Araxis, in the skies, and in the silence after, and they knew. Someone had built that ship. Someone had told it to protect those who had no one, and someone had done it not for glory, but because they remembered what it felt like to be forgotten. Long after the Aegis Eternum disappeared from the sky, the colony of Araxis received a message. No fanfare, no official channel. It came through a rusted comms relay still clinging to life under the North Ridge, a backup system powered by a solar unit barely holding charge. The signal was quiet, not encrypted, not coded, just simple. A voice, human, worn, measured, and deeply familiar, though no one could quite say why. It spoke only once. "This is Aegis Eternum. We received your distress. We responded because no one else did. You are not forgotten. You never were." That was all. No coordinates, no name, no request for thanks, just truth. Spoken plainly. The voice carried a weight beyond the words. It wasn't angry. It wasn't triumphant. It was tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from weakness, but from experience. From long roads walked alone. From countless silences broken too late. On Araxis, the people gathered around the transmission. Some cried. Some stood in silence. The voice didn't make them feel safe. It made them feel seen. Acknowledged. For the first time, they weren't just a forgotten dot on a council map. They were people, and someone had come for them. The technician Elian, who had sent the original message, recorded the transmission onto a data crystal. He sealed it in a protective case and placed it in the colony's central hall. Not because it was valuable, but because it mattered. It reminded them that even when the galaxy turned away, there was someone, still listening. Still willing to cross the stars, not for orders, not for reward, but because it was right. Word of the transmission spread, slowly but surely. Whispers across distant colonies, smuggled clips through border stations, leaked. Audio recordings posted on old Terran forums buried in forgotten servers, and always the same question followed. Is it real? The answer didn't come from governments, it came from the people, the ones who heard the voice and believed it, because it didn't sound like a myth. It didn't sound like propaganda. It sounded like the truth, the kind spoken without expectation. Just presence, just memory, the kind that stays with you, even after the stars go quiet again. And somewhere, far beyond Araxis, the Aegis Eternum drifted once more. Its systems cooled, its weapons folded back into armor, its AI rested, but it remained listening, waiting. Because it had spoken once and that was enough for now. The footage was shaky, blurry, distorted, shot through cracked glass and burning atmosphere. But it was enough. It showed a shadow in orbit. A ship too large to be real. A beam of light lancing through space, followed by silence. Then, debris, falling like fire. That's all it took. The video spread. From Araxis 4 to nearby systems, from smugglers and traders to stations and colonies no one had visited in years. It moved through the void not as an official report but as proof. The myth had moved, and it had opened fire. The Aegis Eternum was no longer a name whispered in military bunkers or joked about by old captains with too many scars. It was real, and it had chosen a side. Not the council, not the governments, not the ones with fleets and votes and borders. The Aegis had chosen the abandoned. The people everyone else had agreed were too small, too far, too unimportant to save. And suddenly, the balance of power tilted. Not because the Aegis was everywhere. It wasn't. Not because it was building an army. It hadn't. But because no one knew where it would go next. No one knew when it might appear. And that uncertainty changed everything. Council leaders held emergency meetings. Military tacticians ran simulations, trying to model the Aegis's movements, guessing at its weapon systems, attempting to predict the unpredictable. They failed, because the Aegis wasn't following logic. It was following need, and need doesn't follow star charts. Across the galaxy, old systems blinked awake, not warships, not weapons, memories, ancient relays, forgotten posts, redundant backups built into the bones of Terran infrastructure, still alive beneath rust and silence, waiting for the next call. The next cry, the next voice, saying, "Please, someone, anyone, help us." And now that voice would be heard, because the galaxy remembered something it had tried to forget. You don't bury people like the Terrans. You don't erase ships like the Aegis. Not forever, because they remember, and they wait. On a colony called Wessex 9, a young boy watched the Araxes footage with wide eyes. He turned to his mother and asked what the ship was. She hesitated, then said only, "It's what shows up when no one else does." In an underground outpost 2 systems away, a retired engineer dug out an old transmitter. Dusty, broken. He repaired it by hand, whispering to himself, "If it answered them, maybe it'll answer someone else." Even the criminals paid attention. Raiders, cartels, warlords who had grown comfortable preying on isolated colonies suddenly paused. Because if a signal went out, if the Aegis heard it, they wouldn't be the ones left standing. And just like that, without a flag, without a fleet, without a single demand, balance returned. Not through law, not through power, through fear. The kind that comes from knowing that someone is out there, someone who doesn't care about rules, doesn't negotiate, doesn't hesitate, the kind who moves when no one else will, and across every forgotten world, every deep space mining post, every failing dome clinging to life in the black, a new kind of hope took root. Not blind, not foolish, just strong, because if the Aegis answered once, it might do so again. And somewhere in the darkness beyond mapped space, a shape drifted, massive, silent, resting, listening. It didn't need orders, it didn't need direction, it needed only one thing, a reason. And when that reason came, when the stars went quiet again, and the signals were ignored, and the weak were left waiting for a rescue that would never arrive, it would come. Not for glory, not for revenge, not to be thanked, but to keep a promise, carved not into metal, but into memory. If no one else responds, we will.